Hi everybody, my name's John Messina, and I'm going to also, beyond talking about vocabulary, I'm going to do my best to wrap up all the talks together so you have a big coherent picture of what's going on. I work for NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. We're part of the US Department of Commerce. Years ago, we were tasked by the United States federal government as to speed the adoption of cloud computing by the United States government agencies. Clearly, we wanted to go beyond that, but that was a pretty tough task given to us because at that time there wasn't any uniform understanding of what cloud computing even was. There were multiple definitions. You could have lots of conversations with people, but it wouldn't go anywhere because you'd use different terms, definitions, and it was really hard to have a meaningful conversation. So what NIST did was sit down with stakeholders, and we had a series of workshops, public working groups. We tried to bring all the stakeholders together to get a better idea of what cloud computing was. I mean, that's the first step. If you're going to work on this area, you need to figure out what it was. So this came out with its own definition of cloud computing. From that, we went on to develop a reference architecture, which is, call it a high-level conceptual model of what cloud computing is. What are the major components? How do they interact together? What does it mean? Once you have that, we then did a technology roadmap which really identified what exists, what doesn't exist, and what were the high-level concerns that were holding back the adoption from cloud computing. I mean, we did all that. Obviously, cloud computing has been moving along nicely. We took all that, and a lot of our efforts became seed documents into the standards efforts that Don talked about. And then NIST has been working with them over the years doing standards development. And the United States government now has a lot of these standards. Individual consumers have it. And we've moved along nicely. Now, as Don pointed out, we're at the stage where we're doing an expansion. And one of the things that the United States government has been very interested in is the concept of federated cloud, whatever that means. And what we decided to do was to do the same sort of methodology we did for cloud computing and apply it to federated cloud. We want to get the stakeholders together and fully understand what does it mean to be federated cloud. What are the terms and the vocabularies? What are the major pieces? We want to do a reference architecture for federated cloud so we can see where the components are, how they interact. We can see where the gaps are, obviously. And we wanted an underlying vocabulary so that we could have meaningful dialogues between all the stakeholders and moving it forward. The idea is that when we do this, and our modified version of it, before we did it and then we handed it over to the standards organization, this time we wanted to do a closer meld with various standards organizations such as the IEEE effort that Robert Bond is talking about. So we did ourselves a kind of a point where we're doing a chicken and the egg kind of thing at the moment. But what we do within our public working group is we have a vocabulary effort where we're trying to identify terms and definitions that would be relevant to the conversation for federated cloud. At the same time, we have a subgroup that's looking at the high-level conceptual model of what federation actually means. And the efforts feed into each other. As the conceptual groups sit around and talk about concepts, well, this concept is a part of federated cloud, well, maybe we don't have a term that accurately describes it. Let's go to the vocabulary group and they can give us feedback. And so we've been going back and forth now over the last couple of months, developing a basic, let's call it an alpha version of the reference architecture or conceptual model for the federated computing along with the vocabulary. The goal of the NIST Public Working Group, which I will mention is open to anybody who's interested, and clearly we have quite a few people participating, is that by the end of the year we're going to have some sort of publication where we have a core set of vocabulary and collected into a document that we're going to publish. Now, we don't necessarily want to generate all new terms from scratch. We want to obviously adopt terms that make sense that have been previously defined somewhere else if it's suitable. We don't want to generate necessarily reference architectures completely out of the blue. We are definitely trying to leverage existing work. But we want to have those documents in place by the end of the year because that will help speed the work that's going to go on in the various standardization efforts, whether it's the IEEE effort or I'm sure we will be doing a lot in SC38 and the ISO IEC. And I can show you what we have currently. So you have this is one of several slides. So this is the federated cloud conceptual model. This particular one focuses on cloud-to-cloud federation. Now, the example I almost always use when describing a conceptual model of what something is kind of like a building diagram. Federation is so complex, it's really hard to capture it into one picture. Really, like a building, you would look at various different schematics. You would have a wiring diagram for a building where it would show all the wiring systems, or the HVAC system diagrams for a building. So for cloud computing and now for federated cloud computing, we're going to have multiple viewpoints into federated cloud so that you can see the individual components and understand what's going on. This one slide of many is focusing on what does it mean to do cloud-to-cloud federation. One of the things that we've discussed in the public working group is the interesting thing is that you have the situation where you have one cloud provider engaging with another cloud provider. You have the mechanisms by which a federation is created, where they agree to share common policies, management, means of access. And so that means you kind of have something in the middle there now. So this graph represents, like I said, one tiny slice is you could have a cloud service provider in one regulatory and administrative domain working with another one in potentially a different regulatory and administrative domain. So you have what we're tentatively calling a federation cloud broker, but it doesn't necessarily have to be an individual. It could be one of the existing cloud service providers. It could be a conglomerate activity. But these are really the functions that are needed for this sort of stuff. How do you get them to engage with each other? You have membership identity issues that you need to work out, roles and attributes. How are policies established? How do you deal with resource discovery? So what we're doing is developing these high-level slides for the various viewpoints in the Cloud Federation. And then we are then working with the vocabulary group to make certain all these terms are defined. It's also interesting is management also needs to be in this picture, which actually ties in Joel and his effort there. Obviously, companies are very good at dealing management within their own particular companies. But when you start talking about a federation where you might have multiple members who have agreed to come into this new entity, you now have much more complex management issues. And then you have the terms and definitions. We have a couple here. These are just the highest level terms. Federation, for example, is a term that almost typically refers to government organizations and hasn't really been applied well to the cloud world. So we have federation as an organization of self-governing entities that have common policies, administrative controls, enforcement abilities governing the use of shared resources among members, which naturally leads to Cloud Federation, a federation where interoperability and portability near the sharing of resources, which is all ensured through agreed upon mechanisms. We also have terms that we've taken from various ISO IEC activities and NIST documentation. We will continue on developing the vocabulary. We will continue on developing the conceptual models, and all of these will be shared. If you go to the NIST Twiki website, you can find all of this data. We are currently having like weekly calls if people want to join in. But hopefully this effort will help inform and accelerate the work that's being done in all the various standards efforts. So.
Panasonic.